Alright, welcome back everyone to this lesson. In this video you're going to be learning about values. Now, what are values and why are they so important to being able to read music? Well, so far you know how to identify any note on the stave, and that's the grand stave, so that's treble notes and it's also bass notes. But sure, you can say that is a G, I'm playing this G and this B at the same time, we know what the notes are, but how fast are we playing them? Are we holding them down? Are we playing them short or long? How fast are we doing these? Do they have a sense of rhythm? And that's why values are so important. Because when you come to read sheet music, you're going to see different symbols that equate to different values. It means that for this particular symbol, you hold it down for much longer than another symbol. So in this lesson, you're going to learn about these symbols. And by the end of this lesson, you're going to be able to integrate all this information about values, and you're going to be able to put that with identifying notes. And then from there, you're going to be very, very close to being able to read pretty much all of music, because there's not that much else to cover in terms of the fundamentals on how sheet music works. So I'm going to start off by drawing here one of the most common symbols that you have probably seen, even if you have absolutely no musical experience, and that is this one here. So I'm going to draw it quite large so you can see it clearly. So we have a full circle and a line that goes up. So this symbol, there are three components that you're going to see in common with not just this symbol, but the other symbol that you're going to be seeing too. You have the head, which is going to be this circle here. You're going to see that this one is obviously filled out. Then we have the stem, and that is this vertical line. Okay, we don't call this, the line. We don't call this like a tail. We call it the stem. Okay. Then you have the tail, which is actually not present on this particular symbol, but you're going to see it on the next symbol. So this one here actually means a crotchet, and that is worth 1 beat. So whenever you see this symbol, which is called a crotchet, it means you're holding that note down for 1 beat. So I just want to point out here that these names that I'm going to be writing out here are going to be following the English system. Okay? Now the American system follows a very different way of naming these. They have very different names. I'm not going to mention them or bring them up in this lesson, but if you do happen to want the American names, I will give you those just in case you happen to be working with American musicians or at an American school or whatever. Now the next one is actually very similar, and we have our full circle, we have our stem, but we have the tail. Okay, so we have the head, which is also filled out here, we have the stem and the tail. The little flick in the end is the tail. Again, not to be confused for the stem. Now this is called a quaver, and it is worth a half beat. Okay, which means it would take 2 quavers to match up to the value of 1 crotchet, because if a quaver is half, obviously you need 2 halves to make up a whole, which is the 1. So far we have crotchet and we have quaver, very similar, except that we've got this tail which separates them. Now we next have quite a different symbol, where it's actually an empty circle with a stem. So the shape is quite similar to the crotchet, but it's an empty circle. Now this has a very different meaning, and it's called a minim, and that's worth 2 beats, right? So every time you see a minim, you're holding that note down for 2 beats. So to quickly integrate this into what we know so far, let's say that we're counting in 4, okay? So I'm saying 1, 2, 3, 4. If every note I'm playing is going to be a crotchet, I'm going to be playing 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so far we've mostly been playing in crotchets. You're going to see more about this when we do sight reading, but let's say that we were in quavers. It takes 2 quavers to match up to 1 beat. So if 1 beat is equivalent to a crotchet, then it would take 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm snapping my fingers twice. So let's say I'm playing it. I'm playing the note twice per beat, right? And that's if the beat is, one crotchet. Now, what about minim? Well, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, another symbol that you'll see is actually an empty circle. So very different to any of these so far, except maybe the closest to a minim, because it does not have the stem. Now this has a very different meaning, a semibreve, and that is worth 4 beats. So when you see a semibreve, an empty circle, that is 4 beats. You're never gonna see really like variations of this. It's either that symbol or it's not, or it's another symbol. You won't see, for example, a quaver with an empty circle. You're not gonna see a semibreve that's filled in. But can you see a minim that's filled in? Yes, but you wouldn't call that a minim. You'd call that a crotchet. That's just a difference in the shape. Now, these 4 values here are the most basic values that there are. There are actually a bit more complex ones, but to start off with, these are the most important. Now, I want you to just commit this to memory first, okay? Especially the names, the quaver, the minim, the semibreve. I'm going to test you on it, and then I'm going to give you the more advanced ones that you're actually not going to see immediately, but knowing these more advanced symbols will absolutely help you, because if I don't show you this, of course, when you go to read music eventually and you have these advanced symbols, you want to know what they mean, right? So now if you see a minim, you know that's 2 beats, so you hold that note for 2 beats. So make sure you commit these to memory. There's not really much of a fancy way to actually remember them. It's really just, looking at it and say, all right, this is a crotchet, it's worth 1. This is a minim, it's worth 2. This is what they look like. This is what it's called. This is how you say it. Make sure that you can identify each one of them separately. So if I say, what symbol has 4 beats? You'd say semibreve. And what does it look like? This one, this one, this one, or this one? And you pick the right one. So we're going to do something similar to that in the quiz very, very shortly. So pause the video now and remember these if you haven't already. Okay, so this is the quiz part. I'm going to give you a piece of information. All right, so I'm going to give you one of these 3, either the symbol, the name, or the value, and you're going to fill out the other 2. Right? Just say them out in your head. You don't have to write it unless you want to, but you have to be comfortable with this. To start off with, I'm going to write in minim. So, what does a minim look like? And how many beats does it have? How many beats is a minim worth? So take a second and try to avoid looking at your notes if you can help it, and think about what that minim could be. You can pause the video if you want more time, but I'll just start filling out now. A minim is worth 2 beats, and the symbol is an empty circle with a stem. Hopefully that was okay. The next one, I would like you to tell me what is worth 4 beats, what it looks like, and what it's called. So I'll give you a few seconds now, thinking back to our symbols, remembering what the difference are. Is there in their shape, filled in circles, do they have a stem, is there a tail, etc. So I'll start filling it now. The symbol is an empty circle, and it is called a semibreve. The next one is this symbol here, where you have a filled in circle, a stem, and a tail, right? So how many beats is this worth, and what is the name of it? I'll give you a few seconds. You can even use process of elimination, since you know what the minim is, you know what the semibreve is, you know what this one's worth and that one's worth, and we have 2 other ones that we haven't used yet. So hopefully you can remember the first one that we did, and this one is called a quaver, and it's worth 1/2. Which leaves the last one with being a crotchet, and that looks like this. It's a filled in circle with a stem, and that's going to be worth 1 beat. Hopefully that made sense. It's really not something massively complicated. It's just a bunch of symbols. some names, and what they each represent in value. So I'm just going to quickly go through, the beat counting for these. So if we're in 4 and we're counting minims, so we're going to be doing 1, 2, 3, 4. If we have a semi-brief, it's just 1, 2, 3, 4. If we have quaver, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, half, there's 2 quavers per beat. Then you have the crotchet, which is just 1, 2, 3, 4, the most basic of them all. So like I said, these are the simple, most basic values that you will see, which you will definitely see. And now I'm going to show you the more advanced symbols that you will also definitely see. Now, don't be put off by this name, advanced symbols, because it's the exact same concept as you've just done over here, just with slightly different symbols and slightly different names. Okay, so the first symbol we're doing is actually one that you've seen very recently. It's similar to a quaver, but it's just sort of a variation of it. So we're going to have our filled in circle, we have our stem, we have our tail, but I'm going to add a second tail. Okay, so that is going to be called a semi-quaver, and that's going to be worth 1/4, which means you would take 4 semi-quavers to add up to be 1 beat. I'm not even sure if I can snap my fingers as quickly, but 4 semi-quavers, if we're counting in 4, would be 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. When we start playing this on a piano, it's going to be a lot easier to digest. That's what a semi-quaver is. Quaver has 1 tail, a semi-quaver has 2. You might be thinking, well, if you can have more than 1 tail, have 2 tails, can you have more than 2 tails? The answer is yes. You can have 3 tails, 4 tails. It doesn't actually happen that often. Seeing semi-quavers is actually pretty common, but seeing what's called demi-semi-quavers, which has 3 tails, is very, very rare. Like, I would be very surprised if you ever encountered a demi-semi-quaver, but that would just be 1/8. So if you haven't caught on already, each tail you add on would half the value of the previous tail. So 1 quaver, which is a tail, would be half. Semi-quaver, add a tail, 1/4. Next would be 1/8. Next would be 1/16. But don't worry about that at all. Semi-quavers is really the fastest that you're going to realistically see. The next one is actually interesting because it's not tied to a particular shape. So for this example, I'm going to draw in our full note, our stem. So that is our crotchet. Now, I'm actually going to draw a little dot on the side. Okay? This is called a dotted note. All right? Dotted note. Now, explanation here is going to be a bit lengthy, but essentially a dotted note means you take the original value of the note it's tied to. In this case, it's a crotchet worth 1 beat. You half it, and then you add to the original. Okay? So, dotted note. It's a dotted crotchet here, right? Crotchet is worth 1 beat. Half of 1 beat is a half. So this would be 1.5 because I'm adding half of the beats. Well, what if I had a semi-brief with a dot? Well, you take 4, you half it, so you have 2, and you add that to the original value. So 4 plus 2 would be 6. So that would be worth 6 beats. Very rare that you'll find this, but this is a lot more common. You can technically add this dot to any form of note. You can even add it to a semi-quaver, where you half it and you add it to the original. So I'm going to add that definition here. So a dotted note, write down here that for a dotted note, you half the original and then you add it on. Now I have drawn in a dotted crotchet because that's the most common form of a dotted note that you will see. You might also actually find a dotted minim. So I want you to think about this and say to yourself how many beats this would be worth. If you see a dotted minim, how long are you holding that note for? Half the original value and then you add it on. So if this is worth 2, you half 2, so you have 1. Then you add the 1 to the original, which is 2. Now 2 plus 1 is 3. So this would actually be worth 3 beats. Again, you can find this on any symbol. So if you want to draw in a dotted crotchet, that's fine. But maybe make a note mentally or on your paper that you can find it anywhere. So in terms of values and more advanced symbols, you have these two as well. So as you can tell, it probably wasn't as big of a deal as you thought it was. Nothing to worry about. Dot note is the only one that you might want clarity on, which we are going to do together. But semiquaver is pretty straightforward. Semi, so you half it, like semibreve. You might think, well, if semibreve and semi is half, then can you have a breve? You can, but the chances of you finding this in piano music is very, very slim. You normally find breves actually in orchestral music when you have a big orchestra, and due to the nature of how an orchestra plays, some notes are holding notes for a very long time to add this thickness. I'll write it down just because if you might ever play in an orchestra or a band, you may find this. So a breve is actually, you have a semibreve, and then you have a line on both sides like that. So you have 2 lines on both sides. This is called a breve, and this is going to be worth 8 notes, which is the reason it's so rare to find. So hopefully you're okay with at least these 2 and the basic ones, because you're going to find those a lot more commonly than this one. So next lesson, we're going to be diving into time signatures and bars, and how all of these symbols that you just learned for rhythm and values are going to fit into the grand stave, so that you're able to identify what note you're playing, but also how long you're playing them for. And you're going to have some variety, which is why you get rhythm. So your homework task is simply to remember all of these symbols that we went through, be confident in them, because I'm not really going to go through all of these again. Very straightforward thing, and you're more than capable of just committing them to memory. If you do happen to have problems with memorizing these, that's not a problem at all, because as we continue through this course through examples and through our own practicing together, it'll be easier to look at and understand. So besides that, great job this lesson, and I'll see you in the next one.